Hey everybody, this is Ethan from Comics with Friends. Thanks for joining us today on this really awesome episode of Hellblazer. Mason and I are super glad to see you with us again. Before we get started, I do want to just kind of give a slight content warning for this episode. Hellblazer is a mature comic for a mature audience and deals with very heavy themes such as racism, homophobia, illness, and child abuse, and all the nasty stuff that no one really likes to deal with. So with that warning being said, please enjoy the episode if you still want to watch. If not, we completely understand. So yeah, enjoy. Hello, fellow conjurers of the mystic arts. This is Comics with Friends, the bi-weekly podcast where two best buds get together and read some rad comics. I am your host, Ethan, joined by my co-host and best bud of all time, Mason. How's it going, bud?
It's going, that's for sure. I'm excited to get into this.
I am too. Obviously, by the title of the video, you guys already know we are covering Hellblazer, Original Sins. Very, very good comic with some heavy themes.
Yes.
So that is definitely going to be a big part of this episode.
Yes. We will be putting a content warning in the beginning of this episode, but to reiterate, we will be dealing with a lot of mature topics.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try and be as delicate about it as we can.
Of course.
But it deals with, things like racism, homophobia, and it definitely, if you do decide to read this, be warned, it is written during the 80s, and some of the terminology that they use could be very offensive to some.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we are not going to be repeating that
word for word
or anything. So.
We might gloss over a few issues, not for the sake of like it being bad or boring, but just because of who we are as people and the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah.
We'll
give you the main point
of the issue.
Because right off the bat we can think of one that was definitely a rough read.
Yeah.
And so like I said, we'll try being as delicate about it as possible.
Yeah. So yeah, we are covering Hellblazer, Original Sins. This is written by Jamie Delano and drawn by John Ridgway. Right off the bat, I can give you a little bit of history about the character. John Constantine was created in the 80s, obviously. He was created in 1985. He made his first appearance in Swamp Thing. I believe it was issue 37 of Swamp Thing. He played a side character role, and he was very popular. When he showed up, fans really loved his inclusion, loved his personality and everything. And so DC decided to give him a book under the Vertigo label, which is the same label that Swamp Thing was a part of back in the 80s. And Vertigo is kind of a complicated label that kind of deserves its own video in a sense, where it is its own separate publishing label under DC that was kind of meant for two things. One, more mature stories. So obviously with the book that we're going to cover, very mature. Swamp Thing was also very mature for its time. But another thing it was kind of there to do was to kind of launch British authors into comic book mainstream.
Yeah.
A lot of the books that we love and associate with Vertigo are kind of like the big, like you've got Watchmen, V for Vendetta, John Constantine or Hellblazer, you got Swamp Thing. Funny enough, 3 of those books I just mentioned were all written by Alan Moore. So, kind of funny that I just named 3 books, but only 2 authors.
I get what you're saying, and probably also a way to get the UK writers into the
you get Sandman and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you get Garth Ennis and I'm forgetting his name now. The guy that wrote Sandman.
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman.
Love Neil Gaiman.
I bet you don't now.
I mean, I really like his writing.
But it's love the art, hate the artist.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. Though, to be fair, I read half of like American Gods and I had to put it down because my soul couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah,
because that book is rough. Not because it's necessarily
depressing,
bad, but it is just the opening chapter. I was like, oof, I'm in a doozy for this one.
That's how I felt too.
Also kind of how I felt when I started reading Hellblazer too.
No, yeah.
After the first issue, I was like, we're in it, you know.
Yep.
This one's gonna be in the mud.
Yeah. So I feel like that's kind of it for Hellblazer knowledge and history. He's very much connected to the DC universe.
Yeah.
In Vertigo, they had this really weird thing of like, it's a part of the DC universe, but not at the same time. Like if writers wanted it to be a part of it, they could. So that's why you get stories like Watchmen and V for Vendetta.
Justice League Dark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's part of the main timeline, but like that came out way after.
I'm just saying it brings those types of characters.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it always throws me for a loop when we read something that is like this mature and stuff like that, but it's part of like DC or Marvel. Yeah. Because it's like when you think of DC and you think of Marvel, you think of your standard superheroes, and while they can get dark, it's never like, it never crosses that line.
Mm-hmm.
Hellblazer sees the line, spits on, and then continues to walk over it.
Yeah.
That's what Hellblazer does. Hence the hesitation to like just go full into it and like let whoever listens know, if you're buckling up on this ride, there's some heavy stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah.
So I guess we should just get into it. We open up issue 1 with this post office worker named Henry, who is very, what's the word? Not sick looking, but he's sweating a lot, breathing heavy, and there's this constant narration. And sorry, before we get into this story, I'm going to go ahead and warn you guys, this book is heavy on narration.
Think very noir, like a very noir
That's what it gave
story.
Off. Yeah, it gives off a lot of noir aspects, very Batman Year One in that sense, where you get to see what a lot of people are thinking.
Yeah,
not necessarily a lot of dialogue.
Yep.
Which is both good and bad at the same time, because it's cool to kind of get to know what characters are like without them just having to come out and say it to another person.
It definitely helps with the exposition, I think.
It does. But it is also one of those situations where, because of how much narration there is, it almost falls into that like show don't tell territory in some moments, but it's not common enough to detract from the story for me.
I would agree. I also find the narration, a lot of times what they are doing with it is explaining the scene that you are looking at, but using obviously very detailed, similes or metaphors and stuff like that to describe the feeling that the character is having without like outright being like, the character feels this.
Yeah.
It's like obviously very detailed and like eloquent in the sense of like it's trying to evoke a feeling of the reader to share a similar feeling that the character on page is also feeling.
Right. So yeah, we open up with this character named Henry, who is kind of stumbling out of his place of work. His coworkers are trying to figure out if he's okay. And the narration and Henry himself talk about how hungry he is. And the narration says that it's an unending hunger. There's nothing that can really, satiate it. And he even ends up going to like this food cart and orders like 6 burgers, eats them all, and
still feels hungry.
He ends up going to this high-class restaurant and orders everything off the menu.
And then some.
And is eating stuff, and it's just not enough. And as we go on, the narration talks about how the hunger is starting to like eat at him.
Yeah, and every time he eats something, the hunger only gets worse.
Yeah. And eventually he ends up attacking this couple that's kind of sitting right next to him. Well, he eats their food first.
Yeah.
And then he attacks the wife or the girlfriend and starts to attack her. And as he's doing that, he's starting to like
wither away
and shrivel up to the point where he's like almost mummified.
And it should also be said that he is a rotund man.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he goes to like this high class restaurant and stuff, the couple, they're like, he's just, you know, being a pig. He's that. I mean, they even say he's just fat and disgusting.
Yeah.
And it's that is, I bring that up to say that like it lends to that weirdness of he's starving and withering away, even though technically he eats plenty.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And yeah, he ends up looking mummified. And I think the EMT or whatever is like, if I didn't know or the waiter that was waiting on him was like, if I didn't know he just ate half a restaurant, I would have said he starved to death.
Yeah. So we cut from that immediately to the UK. That I believe that all happened in New York.
Yeah.
Because I believe this whole first arc takes place in New York. I will say this before we get any further. We are covering the first 10 issues of Hellblazer. I would say the first 3 are kind of smaller like the first 3 issues are smaller introductory, stories. And then 4 is kind of where we kick off the main.
Yeah. So the way I would describe it is the first 2 are definitely connected because it's a start and a conclusion.
Yeah, it's kind of your introduction to the character.
And then like I think it's like 3 to 5 I think are like singular stories, but they start to reveal to a bigger thing happening.
Specifically issues 4 and 5. They have like threads that lead into.
And then 6 is like the showcase of like kind of the quote unquote not, I'd say main plot. There isn't really a main villain per se.
No, not in a traditional sense.
Yeah, and then 7 through 10 is like your climax and your conclusion and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's definitely not like a normal comic read as far as like having an arc and you can follow the arc cleanly. This is like you kind of pick up on subtle things that are happening and then you piece them together once it starts to reveal itself later.
So Constantine has just returned from America back to his home in the UK. He talks about how, he misses the city. He misses the sound, the smell. He makes reference to Swamp Thing about how it's better than the swamp.
Yeah.
And he makes other references that, when I first read it, I didn't necessarily understand it because I haven't read Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, surprisingly. But he makes references that I can only assume are from Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
That's
his first appearance.
Exactly. And because he talks about characters like Emma and some other friends that just do not have any context behind them.
Yeah.
And he talks about how, specifically Emma is dead and that he misses her, that kind of stuff.
Ex-lover.
Yeah. And when he gets home, his landlady is kind of like, hey, just so you know, like your friend can't stay here. Like we're an upstanding, like building.
Yeah.
And we only accept like upstanding tenants. And John is like,
then why am I here?
What? Yeah. He's like, first off, why am I here? Second, what friend?
Yeah.
I don't have friends.
Yeah. And she was like the junkie, essentially.
Yeah. And this is kind of where we get into our first,
kind of heavy topic.
And try to keep an open mind that this is the 80s. Drug addiction and drug abuse were viewed very differently back in that time.
And on the rise.
Yes, and on the rise. It was, Reaganomics, that kind of deal.
That stuff.
All of it.
I guess we should also say beforehand when we start talking about these heavy things, me and Ethan are not experts.
No.
We are not historians or anything like that. So we could be wrong on some things, but we're going to try and do our best to be like respectful about it and things like that. So
obviously there are topics that get covered that we have history with.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, when we talk about this stuff, just know that we are not like Mace said, we're not historians, but we will try to be as respectful to people and their plights as possible. You know, in this show, in this group, we love everybody.
Yeah.
You know, everybody is welcome as long as you show love to others.
Yeah.
So if you get anything from our show through all of our episodes, this is a house of love.
Yeah. We're just trying to share our love for comedy.
Yeah.
And our love for each other.
Yeah. I love you, bud.
I love you too, man.
So yeah, she kind of says like she doesn't want him here because he does drugs, and I think it's kind of implied, or no, he does come out and say it, that the drug is heroin. Yes. He's a heroin addict.
They use slang terms for a long time until I think
they call it like gear.
Yeah, they call it gear or whatever, you know, all the different slang terms. But I think it's not until the second issue when he's talking to the character Mr. Midnight, wherein he actually like outright says heroin. Yeah.
So John, he gets home and he immediately is like, something's off. Like he thinks his friend is gone. The friend's name is
Gaz.
Gaz, that's his nickname.
Yeah.
It's like something Lester.
Yeah.
I believe it's like Gary. It is Gary. It's Gary Lester.
Yeah, but he calls him Gaz.
Yeah, that's his nickname. He's a childhood friend of Constantine's. And when he gets in his apartment, he's like, something is fucking weird. It smells weird in here. And he sees a syringe next to his like usual sitting chair. And when he picks it up, it's filled with, I'm going to assume, heroin and bugs.
Yeah.
The bugs thing is kind of fucking gross.
Yeah.
About it, like thinking about it.
Yeah.
And even Constantine's like, oh,
this is like a whole new low. Is what he's thinking.
Constantine deals with demons and fucking crazy shit
spirits
on a daily basis, but this is what drives him up the wall, because he ends up like going to his kitchen and he sees that the kitchen is just fucking
it's
filthy. Yeah, he's like, it smells like death.
Yeah, he opens the fridge and there's bugs all over the fucking fridge,
and they start crawling like onto the floor and onto him, and he even says like the fridge is always the worst part, and he ends up like throwing up, and he's like, I can't do bugs. That's not I'm not doing.
He goes to the bathroom to throw up, and that's when he finds
Gaz
in the bathtub, just one, suffering from withdrawal, and two, just covered in insects, and he's like losing his shit.
Yeah, he's asking John for help, and John's like, oh, I'll help you, all right. And he leaves, goes to the convenience store,
picks up bug spray.
He's like, give me the strongest stuff you have. And then he starts fucking like going to town on this guy. He's like, I forget the reference he makes. He's like, I'm like Billy the Kid and Genghis Khan rolled into one.
Yeah, just killing all these bugs. And he's not leaving a stone unturned. He's like getting underneath the cabinets and like he's killing every insect he can find.
He's spraying gas as well. He's like, hold your breath. And eventually he calls in one of his friends, and he's like, hey, I need you to like watch this guy. And we start getting references to a demon named
Minmoth or something.
Yeah, I said it was Nemoth.
Nemoth, probably.
Like maybe the M is silent, but it is MNOMOTH or something like that. Or it's MNEMOTH, yeah.
Yeah. He finds out about this demon because to find out what's going on, he hypnotizes and like gets into Gaz's brain.
Yeah.
And turns out, despite the fact that he is an addict, Gaz also practices magic. And I think it's also alluded to that's how he ended up becoming an addict.
Yeah.
Was because of all the stuff that they deal with as magical conjurers and stuff that he turned to doing drugs to like cope. And so he apparently to actually get even harder drugs, Gaz had gone to like Thailand or something like that, and came across this kid, this African native who had like these tattoos and stuff like that. On the street, and he had realized what was going on, that there was some kind of demon inside the kid or whatever, and so he chose to do an exorcism on it. Well, he managed to succeed on the exorcism and trap this hunger demon in this bottle.
Succeed is a very strong word.
Succeed in the sense of drawing the demon out. The kid died.
Yeah.
Essentially like a flaying.
Yeah, it is really disturbing how like nonchalant and descriptive it is, because John is continuously saying like, okay, well, what happened to the kid?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what happened to the kid? And then Gaz is just like, oh, the kid, he's dead. Like he was flayed and his skin was bloody tatters. It was hanging off the bed.
Yeah, because when he did the exorcism, the bugs, because the bugs and insects are like the defining feature of this hunger demon or whatever, which I instantly thought of our Nightcrawler episode with the hive demon. And
that's
everything.
very interesting, yeah.
And at first I thought it was going to be a slight reference, like obviously two different Marvel and DC, but, you know, like maybe like the same type of demon,
like same name.
Yeah, maybe something. But it is different. And yeah, the bugs like came out of the skin and stuff, and that's why the kid unfortunately died like flayed and
very gruesome
mess. Yeah. And he managed to succeed in trapping the demon, but I don't know if it's because I definitely think it's obviously the demon was still having some kind of influence through the bottle on Gaz, but I also I assume maybe the demon used like his addiction to like coerce him to like open the bottle and end up like drinking the demon in.
That's kind of what it's alluded to, where the demon just kind of like basically breaks his will.
Yeah.
And it's the classic like demon promising you like nirvana for a small price, and that price is usually never small.
Yeah, and he ended up drinking the demon in, but at the same time, he ends up mailing like essentially some of the demon to Constantine, and because at the time he thinks Constantine's in New York, and so he sends it to New York, and in the next issue we get into, or later this issue and the next issue, we get into why John never received it.
Yeah.
And that is how the postal worker ended up having part of this demon in him, and why he was like gorging himself and still died.
And they do mention that at the beginning, we kind of glossed over it, that Henry, the postal worker, doesn't even know why he opened it.
He just did.
And he just did, and he doesn't even remember what was in it.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So John has Gaz draw a picture of this child, what he looked like, and he even makes a reference like, damn, you should have stayed in art school because this is a very good sketch.
I will also say, as far as some of the sensitivity stuff in this, some of the art depictions, especially of characters of minority ethnicities and stuff like that, are unfortunately very stereotypical, and also in today's day and age would be considered offensive.
Yeah,
I understand
it's not cool today.
It is not, and I understand it's the 80s and it's a different sensibility then. I don't condone that that's how they were doing things.
Correct,
but that was unfortunately mainstream thinking at the time. And so I do warn anyone who decides to read this to be aware of that.
And I will say, you know, obviously I completely agree, no condoning it is wrong. But I will say a lot of the people who drew during this time period who are still in the business today have come out and said that they deeply regret, you know, the way that they depicted certain people, whether they be of a minority group, you know, or a part of the LGBT community, or, you know, anything like that. And they have since then, you know, done their best to rectify, you know, their past deeds. So that is something I always try to keep in mind when it comes to older stories that we read, that, you know, some of these people did what was normal for their time.
Yeah. I will also say, despite these kinds of things being in this comic, the character John Constantine and the stances that some of the main characters have in this are very progressive.
They are,
you know, for the time.
For the time, yeah. Especially John Constantine, who,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that was just kind of baked into his character, where it's like he doesn't necessarily care who you are,
Yeah.
or where you come from, because like in the end of the day, it's business.
Yeah, and two, he's dealing with demons and angels, and spirits, and stuff.
It's a completely different, like, level of bullshit that he's got to deal with on a daily basis.
He's the type of person where, like, he is on humanity's side.
Yeah.
So, like, he doesn't care who you are. You're human.
Yeah.
You know?
Now, that's not to say that Constantine's a perfect character in the sense of, like, he's not Superman.
Yeah. No. He will do some awful things, but at the end of the day, he's trying to help ensure humanity's survival.
I mean, he does some awful things in this.
Yes.
In not just this arc.
This issue.
Yeah. So, John, he's essentially like, okay, well, I will return. You guys have fun. His other friend's like, what the fuck? Where are you going? Like, I have work. And John's like, you owe me. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And he catches the nearest taxi, or the closest taxi, and is like, take me to the airport. And John just goes to Africa. Yeah. He's like, this is costing me like a king's ransom. Yeah. But like, it's gotta.
He takes the sketch that Gaz did, and he's traveling around Africa trying to locate the source of where this kid came from. And he eventually does stumble upon a village where there is like a shaman that he can tell practices, I think he considers it elemental magic or something like that.
Yeah.
And the shaman ends up explaining essentially what happens is that through doing like hallucinogenics and a ritual with each other, he's like showing John Constantine like the story of what happened and everything. But essentially this kid was used as a vessel to trap this hunger demon / spirit, and in order to kill it was to let the vessel wither and die without any sustenance.
Yeah.
And the shaman had believed that he had succeeded in doing that, but he had left before like finalizing the child's death. And poachers, I believe he said, came across the child and ended up selling the kid into slavery for basically smokes.
Yeah.
And obviously the kid then reached civilization, was then fed to stay alive and be slave labor. And
really fucked up stuff.
And that's when Gaz came across him and realized he had the demon in him. And that's how we get full circle to where we are at now in the story.
Right. This is kind of where we take, I guess that this all happens during your explanation of what, what the scenario is. When he explains all that to Constantine, he's like, I'm going to tell you, but first you got to take this drug.
Yeah.
And you thought Dr. Fate was trippy.
Yeah.
This scene is wild.
And there's even more trippier scenes in the later issues. Like, that was also one thing. I guess we can go ahead and get in the art spiel since, I liked the art for the most part. I don't like it at the same time, but I think the reasons I don't like it lends itself to the world of Constantine, because Constantine lives in a world of just dark brutality and dark magic and things like that, very scary and macabre things. And I think the art lends itself to that, to show how just dirty and brutal the world John lives in. Now, if you were to ask me to look at a panel and not read the story and then show me like a different artist that I like more or whatever, I'd be like, I don't like the art that John Constantine has. Objectively, I don't like it, but within the narrative and the storytelling and stuff, I think it lends it to it.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
I like it for its time.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're probably like in the minority here when it comes to this opinion. I can kind of agree with your sentiment. For me, art is super important because it makes up half the product.
Yeah.
Like, you should have good writing, obviously, because good writing is the whole point of this this show.
Yeah.
But like, you also need to have good art.
Yeah.
Like, to keep people interested.
Well, it's the visual storytelling.
It's a visual medium.
Yeah.
You need it's like reading a movie.
Yeah.
I can definitely agree with a lot of your sentiments. I will say something that kind of pulls me to liking it more now that I've read it, because I was, before we started, thinking about doing this book, I was looking on social media to see what people's opinions on this arc is and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people really like it. And they say Constantine, the way that it's written and drawn, feels like a horror story like a horror TV show on HBO.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like an HBO TV show.
Yeah.
Like, it's high quality.
I would call it a horror noir.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
That's exactly what John Constantine is to me. And reading this, that is even more prevalent in my mind.
Yeah.
I do like the art in the sense of I like the colors. Mm-hmm. The colors
are really good.
They really pop, and they really help, especially with some of the stuff that all this shenanigans are going on and stuff like that. Really helps like keep things readable and like defined.
Yeah.
But as far as like, if you've been listening to any of our episodes and stuff, I'm a big like face person.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I get to the point where like I don't like it, but it lends itself to the world.
Yeah.
Is a lot of the people's faces just like really kind of horrific. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because of that, it adds to the world of like, this is a miserable and brutal world that John Constantine is in. It's not a pretty world.
Which is such a crazy thing to say, because like right across the pond, Superman's like saving the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a completely different art style.
100%. Yeah. It's wild.
Now, I will say, I think this kind of takes place like, I was trying to talk about this with Nicole because she also found this kind of odd, some of the references they were making. This feels like it kind of takes place before the Justice League. Like, it kind of takes place before Batman and Superman, really. But, like, you can't tell.
Yeah. Because the references are so far and few in between.
Yeah.
And, like, vague, too.
Like, and then there's the date, because Constantine does actually drop what year it is, because he says it's 1987. In fact, that's a very important part of the third issue.
Yeah.
With like Margaret Thatcher and all that stuff. And when I said that, Nicole was kind of like, but isn't he like the same age as like Batman and Superman? Like, wouldn't he be super old at this point? Because in this, he's like 30 something.
He's in one of the issues, it's his birthday, and he says he's 35 now.
Yeah. Which would, if we talk about present day, that would make him like 50.
Yeah.
in the comic.
Here's the thing.
It's a sliding time scale.
It's also magic.
Yeah. That's something I brought up to Nicole. Is like, I believe he is older than how he appears.
Yeah.
Because of magic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when you're dealing in the dark arts and stuff like that, you know, I mean, you could also use a situation that happens within the story where he has the blood of a fiend within him.
Yeah.
You could say in that moment, he stopped aging because of that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there's multiple like theories or whatever you could point out why he is the way he is.
Yeah. So he has this psychedelic trip. He ends up being like, all right, I got what I needed. He goes to New York with Gaz, and he ends up going to see... He's a colleague / rival.
Yeah.
/ like
he's another like magical individual.
He's a part of the magical universe. Mr. Midnight?
Mr. Midnight.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is one of those unfortunate uses of stereotypes within this story, because he is a very blatant like voodoo witch doctor stereotype.
Right.
He just happens to wear like a business suit.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes
he's Donald Duck in it, as I like to call it.
Yeah.
Where
he's got the suit top.
But down below is like a grass.
Yeah,
like a traditional African like
skirt,
like ceremonial skirt. Yeah. And he seems interesting as a character because like you can tell he's not like Constantine.
He deals in the same world but is different from him.
Yeah. Which I've always found to be super interesting, that I feel like Constantine has kind of lost that a little bit now that he's, you know, he's not necessarily a part of the Justice League, but like he's a part of the superhero world. I found it kind of cool that you get to meet multiple different magicians, essentially, or sorcerers, and they all kind of
practice it
differently, and they're all doing it for their own reasons. I found that to be super interesting.
Yeah.
And part of me feels like they've kind of lost that.
That's also one thing I really did like. Even though he is a stereotype, I do like Mr. Midnight and the fact that it represents like we play D&D and you have the different schools of magic, right?
Yeah.
You know, like evocation, necromancy, all this stuff like that. While Constantine, I feel like, is a jack of all trades kind of individual, Mr. Midnight obviously specializes in voodoo magic.
Correct,
you know?
yeah.
So like if voodoo magic is real, what other like real world, you know, like magic kind of practices have we heard?
Like
or Wiccan or whatever, you know? If voodoo is a real magic in the world, then what other like real magics based on real life or in the world and stuff?
We know, based off of future comics that have come out, that Constantine, like his lineage, it practices like satanic witchcraft.
Yeah.
Because he has an ancestor who, you know, is a part of that.
Yeah.
So
I agree with you. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And now they've kind of just gone to the blanket like magic.
Yeah.
Like the magic that John does is the same type of magic that Zatanna does, which is like not really. No, because they specifically in this book itself call Constantine a conjurer, and Constantine does a lot of conjuring in this book.
Yes, he does.
Like he does, to the point where it's like, oh, okay, so that's what he does specifically, is conjure shit.
Yeah, and it's not like I'm gonna conjure this creature to aid me. I'm conjuring demons and shit. You know?
So yeah, we get introduced to Mr. Midnight, and you can tell that they kind of have a history. John even mentions like, oh, I conned him out of, I think it was like $50,000.
Yeah, $50,000 because he runs a gambling den.
Yeah, it fronts as a nightclub, but it has an illegal gambling den
and an illegal fight arena.
Yeah, that's like his real business. It's a fight arena.
Yeah.
So he breaks in. You know, we get a couple funny moments with John talking to Gaz, but you also start to get narrations of John thinking about Gaz, and this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, where John is a good guy, but not a good person.
Yeah, he does bad things to do. It's the whole aspect of like the road to hell is paved with good intention.
He is very much the definition, like the truest definition of an anti-hero.
Yes.
Because he starts talking about Gaz, and he's like, Gaz is a fucking idiot. Like, he's my childhood friend and I care about him, but he's a fucking idiot, and he deserves what is coming to him.
Yeah.
Because he played with fate, and now fate's
biting back.
Yeah. So they're traveling through the back entrance, or the maintenance hallways of the nightclub, and that is when they run into
a zombie, but not your flesh eating.
Right. This is like your traditional. This was the inspiration for like Night of the Living Dead, that kind of stuff. A big part of voodoo magic that has been talked about over the many years is witch doctors bringing people back to life, all that kind of stuff, and kind of falls back into that stereotypical thing where they're not smart, they're dumb.
Yeah.
The artwork, again, is very not okay for today's standards. And, you know, we'll just kind of gloss right past that.
Yeah. But they come across him and they use him to get to Mr. Midnight.
Yeah. And John just kind of lays it out on him and is like, look, you know, Nimoth is free. Or Minnoth is free. I think that is his name, Minnoth. Not sure.
It's a demon name. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whenever they do demon names, half the time it feels like they're just like throwing half the alphabet at the wall,
Yeah.
and then whatever.
How many vowels can we put?
Yeah, how many vowels? And also, like, can we say it with the human language? You know, they
Yeah.
just throw it at the wall. It's like they took their hand in the letter soup SpaghettiOs,
Yeah.
took a handful and just yeeted it at the wall.
Yeah.
And whatever noodles stuck, that's what they go with.
Yeah.
Anytime I see a demon name, that's what it feels like half the time.
Yeah. So he's talking to Mr. Midnight, and he kind of is like, look, we're in a really bad situation. This demon is running amok and is just kind of fucking shit up.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are dying because when he got into New York, there was a bunch of like radio news broadcast about people who were dying very similarly to the post office worker. And John is essentially like, look, it's bad for business for you if everyone dies.
Yeah.
So like, you're going to help me.
Yeah.
And Mr. Midnight's like, I'll think about it. And that's code for, yeah, okay, you got me on board.
Yeah,
now.
you got me on that, but I don't want to. So he ends up leaving Gaz there. He's like,
take care of him.
Take care of him.
Yeah, take care of him.
John goes to Emma's house, who is dead.
Yeah.
And when he arrives, there's a new tenant in this apartment, and he's like, she don't live here anymore. And this is where we also discover how the package, like, obviously ended up at the post office, never opened and stuff until Henry opened it, because it got sent back to the post office because it was sent to Emma in hopes it would get to John.
But obviously she's dead.
And the new tenant was like, this isn't mine. Send it back to the post office.
Yeah.
Which,
lucky guy.
Yeah. Honestly, because he easily could have been the one victim, you know?
Yeah.
But as he's like still reeling from like, oh yeah, Emma's dead, because John is a very haunted, literally and figuratively haunted character from his past.
Yeah.
We don't know too much about it. I believe the next arc after we stop doing the 10 issues is when you start getting into John's past. But throughout this whole arc, you get a lot of like John running from himself in his past.
Yeah.
He has not confronted it yet. But as he's on the stairs to this apartment, the ghost of Emma shows up and starts like talking to him and everything like that. And like, it's kind of like tough love, but also not at the same time. And like, he's just like, I miss Emma and all this other stuff. But he's like reminiscing and talking to Emma as they start walking the streets. And that's when they happen upon this scene of this woman and man, this couple.
Vegetarian.
This vegetarian couple, which they walk past a butcher house, and the guy just is like, I'm so hungry, breaks the glass and just starts like feasting on the raw meat. And the woman's like, you're a vegetarian. And he's like, not anymore.
I don't give a fuck.
And when he's diving for that pig torso on the hook, I 100% thought like some Final Destination.
Oh, I did too.
Happen where he's gonna like jump at it and like start eating it, and just like the hook is gonna go through his fucking head or something.
Yeah, I did too.
Thank goodness that's not the case.
No, he crashes in there and then immediately falls out and like shrivels up and dies.
And John, seeing this, he notices a trail of bugs going away from the scene, and he follows it to a parish. And that's when he comes in, and that's when he sees this giant fly spirit demon hovering at the top of this church, about to like infect himself on this priest.
Yeah. John tries to stop it.
Yeah, John's like fully willing to take this thing on, but Emma's ghost is like, you're not strong enough. We need to run. And at first, John's like, nah, fuck that. Like, I'm going to stand my ground. And then as the fly like gets closer to him, he's like, you know what?
Yeah.
Fine, I'm going to run.
He's like, oh, fuck.
and he leaves the priest there to get infected and essentially die. Because the priest, once he's infected, tries to eat the crucifix symbol that's like at the like altar,
like the Jesus that's on the crucifix, and
tries to eat it. Obviously, it's not made of anything real. But that's where we left off with John being like, I need to make essentially preparations to fight this hunger demon.
Yeah. Very long first issue.
Yeah.
I did not realize it was 40 pages until I got to about the halfway point, and I was like, damn, am I on issue 2 already? I didn't even know. And then I looked at it and I went, oh.
I knew it was 40 pages because on the cover of the first issue, it says 40 pages of macabre horror.
Yeah.
And so I knew the first issue was going to be long.
Yeah. So we open up issue 2 with John coming back to Mr. Midnight's club, and he, basically goes to the real establishment. He ends up going into the club, travels down, and he goes through like a sex dungeon type thing.
Just, I think, like a debauchery,
Yeah.
Like rich people getting their rocks off.
Yeah.
In all different kinds of ways.
And then, he actually gets to the illegal fighting den, and that's where him and Mr. Midnight kind of start concocting a plan and start thinking of some stuff. And Mr. Midnight takes John to Gaz, and Gaz is wigging the fuck out because he's still going through withdrawals and he wants heroin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when John kind of reveals like the plan of like, oh, we're going to trap him, but we need you
as bait.
And that's what he's telling Gaz.
The truth of the matter is that John, because it's revealed essentially to us as the reader, because the ghosts are confronting him about what he's about to do. But because he ends up staying the night at Mr. Midnight's place,
penthouse.
Yeah, and a bunch of ghosts from his past show up and are like, you're essentially about to add one more of us.
You're a piece of shit.
Yeah, you're a piece of shit. You're awful. And John's like, what do you care? You're dead. You're ghosts.
Yeah, you all knew, because he says this really cool line. He was like, you were a part of the same life that I was, and you know that our life is a gamble, and sometimes you lose.
Yeah. And because the plan that he has is actually not to use Gaz as bait, but to use him as the vessel, like that shaman did with that kid, to end up defeating the demon.
And sending him back to hell.
Yep.
Really fucked up, but it's got to be done because the demon is just wreaking havoc on New York. And we cut to the next day, and John, Midnight, and Gaz are all on the rooftop, and they let Gaz have one smoke, and then they strap him to this electric chair.
Yeah.
And John's like, where the fuck did you get this? And Midnight's like, it was from an auction.
And the reason why is actually explained that there's certain items in the world
that retain
magical energy. Yeah. And this electric chair wasn't just an electric chair. It was one that was used to take the lives of, I think 300 people or something like that.
Yeah, some of the worst people.
Yeah, so there's powerful magic energy within this chair. That's why they use it to help trap the demon. So they strap Gaz on it.
Yeah.
And then slowly, because Gaz is starting to freak the fuck out, it is revealed to Gaz that the real plan is that he is going to be essentially the sacrifice.
And he's going to die.
Yeah. At first, John was continuing to lie, and he even offered hey, if you just go through this and be the bait, I'll give you the best heroin you could ever ask for.
Yeah.
And that at first calms Gaz. But I think Gaz, he's an addict, but he's not an idiot.
No.
And he's tweaking. So at first, that bribe of heroin worked, but as the demon started to get closer, I think it dawned on him I'm gonna die.
Yep.
And so he starts freaking out again, and that's when John's like, sorry, bud.
Yeah. And it's kind of haunting, the way that he's possessed.
Yeah.
Because he says that the bugs surround us, and then they start to land on Gaz and give him warts, and then they give him like a full beard. And the last thing that John sees before they go, like they envelop him, is his eyes like staring at him.
Yeah.
And then he says like Gaz started to gain like obscene musculature, like he was bloating because the bugs were going into him. And it's just so fucked. And he gives Gaz like he puts the tattoos on him, obviously.
Yeah.
And then he gives Gaz like one last like moment of like peace, and he injects him with heroin.
Yep. And they put him in a straitjacket.
And then John sits there and smokes like easily 5 packs of cigarettes, just through 3 full bottles of like the strongest gin you could possibly get.
Because what they do is they end up putting him in a cell. They put Gaz in a cell, and then they end up bricking it off so no one can get to him, and he just withers away and dies in that cell. And like, this is what I meant. Like, John, he like we said, John does what's good for humanity, but he ends up like having to be an awful human to do it. And it's not that John relishes in it or anything like that. Like, obviously this was his childhood friend, and he hates that he has to do this. I mean, it's driving him to drink and like be feeling really awful about it, you know? And like, so that goes to really illustrate that like John's willing to do these awful things for the betterment of humanity, but he is not necessarily like an awful human being. Like, he'll do awful things, sure, and like scummy things, but at the end of the day, he's doing it for the betterment of humanity, to keep them surviving between the games of heaven and hell.
So he leaves Mr. Midnight's penthouse, high rise, whatever you want to call it, and he's trying to get a taxi to the airport, and he sees Emma and the other ghost of his past waving at him, and he waves back thinking like, oh, they're here to see me off. And then he's like, no, that's not it. I should have guessed. And the ghost of Gaz joins them.
Walks across the street and joins them.
And that is where we end the first like mini arc of the first major arc.
And then we start getting into like the singular issues that start like leaving the breadcrumbs for the last remaining.
And issue 3 is very quick. I'm not going to go into massive detail about it. We're back in the UK, and it is the middle of the election season for them. And this is the Margaret Thatcher issue that we keep referencing. And essentially the whole basis of issue 3 is there is an election going on, and the demons of hell have their own like gambling ring going on. It's almost like betting.
It's like the stock market.
It's like the stock market betting ring type situation. Where people, it's mostly like rich aristocrats.
It's 1%ers. They call them yuppies. Yes.
They're kind of selling their souls to demons of like, hey, if this person wins, like, you know,
or because they're dealing with like stocks and things like that. They're making like bets of like, okay, if this company does really well, I get rich. If it ends up tanking, you have my soul kind of thing. And John ends up catching wind of this, does some investigating and things like that. And this is one of the aspects of Constantine's world that I really enjoy, is like the I guess you could almost say political situation between heaven, earth, and hell. Like how that all works, and there's a society and stuff like that. Because he ends up going to this like demon club. And at first he doesn't realize that it's a demon club.
He doesn't.
Which I'm kind of like, John, brother, like, this is your bread and butter. And you just so happen to waltz into this like demon bar, and they find him out because he takes a drink and like spits it out.
He's like, oh my God,
this is awful.
I think he says it tastes like goat piss.
Yeah, and all the demons just like stop what they're doing and look at him.
Yeah, very very cool, very cool moment. And it's comedic and cool. That is something about Constantine I like, is that like he has a very dark like sense of humor.
Yeah.
And it comes through as genuine. It doesn't feel phoned in.
Yeah. I think it feels genuine because it's almost like a coping mechanism for him.
100%. That's what it feels like.
Because he's surrounded by all this awful shit. So
yeah.
He's got to like somewhat take it lightly.
Yeah, and he mentions in the first couple issues, like, not everybody's cut out for our line of work.
Oh, yeah. 100%. John barely is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. This is also where we're introduced to Ray, who is a very close friend of Constantine and is also gay. He is a closeted homosexual.
Yep.
And that becomes very important later on in the story.
Yes.
And you actually get some really like touching moments with him, and you can actually really tell that their friendship is pretty genuine.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I know, I don't believe they have revealed. Well, no, that's not true, because I think he is at this point. John Constantine is bisexual, because at some point in the story, Ray is talking to another character, and the character asks if John and Ray ever hooked up, and Ray essentially is like, "I don't kiss and tell."
Yeah,
and then obviously continues on that.
And then he also says like, there's nothing really there anyway, because his one true love was his husband. I don't think
they were
married, but in their eyes they were married.
Well, of course, yeah.
And he passed away, and so Ray's like, that's my one true in love. So like, I would never be with Constantine.
Yeah. So, but we get introduced to Ray, who is a pretty cool character. He's very much like Constantine's what's the best way to put this? Not moral center, but he's a good like mentor type character to Constantine.
He gives like
advice.
Yeah. And is usually like, you need to do the right thing and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah.
Obviously we get that bar scene that you were talking about, which is very funny. And we're kind of introduced to the idea of like that stock market thing going on with souls, and John gets put into a really weird situation where he has to find a way to get people's souls back.
Yeah.
And John ends up going to, I believe his name is...
It's like Bloxy or Balathai or something.
Blathoxy. Yeah. Who is the Lord of Flatulence. Very interesting.
He's basically a demon of greed, essentially.
Yeah, he is. And John does what John does best and play mind games with people. And he kind of alludes to that he knows how the election's going to turn out. And it's information that the Demon Lord is not privy to. Dude, these names are crazy.
And so John basically bluffs him.
Yeah, bluffs him and says like, "Oh, how do you know so-and-so's going to win?" And that causes the Demon Lord to be like, "What do you know?"
Yeah, because he's like, "I want to sell my soul."
Yeah.
He's like, "I get rich, and if I lose, you get my soul." And the Demon's Lord is like, "I know you, John Constantine. You wouldn't bet your soul if you weren't..."
For money.
Yeah, for money, if you weren't sure of something.
Yeah. And so he tells his minions to take John away, get him out of here, and the two demons that are carrying him off are basically the ones in charge of like running the stock exchange type deal, and have kind of been like the main focus of this small story. And one of the ones that are carrying him off kind of like, without the Demon Lord's permission,
eavesdrop,
basically say like, "Hey, sell all the stocks, blah blah blah, we're gonna lose." And the demons give all the souls back, or like basically end the contract so no one has to lose their soul.
Yeah.
And then the Demon Lord shows up the night of the election results. Obviously they would have won, but they have no souls, and so the the demon lord melts all of them into like goo.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Because whenever John gets back from hell,
he gets kidnapped by the demons.
By the demons and stuff. And they have him hanging up because they're planning on killing him and like using his blood as like champagne whenever they make it big. Well, they didn't make it big, and that's when Biloxi or whatever the fuck his name is shows up and goops him.
Yeah.
Like Kid Choice Award goops slimes all over him and kills him, and he's like, I'm just gonna play dead. But the demon knows John's alive,
he's like,
but he doesn't want people to know that he got bluffed by John a second time. It's also mentioned that they had interactions before and John had bluffed him once already. And so,
he essentially tells John, like, enjoy your victory, like, you'll see me again. And next time I will have your soul.
Yeah.
That kind of deal. And
he's like, I'm going to feast on your body.
Yeah.
All the, the usual demon threats.
Yeah. And so he leaves, and that's kind of where we end the issue.
Yeah.
And we immediately get into issue 3, which is kind of the starting.
That was issue 3. We're in 4.
Or we're on 4, sorry, yeah. We are on issue 4, and that's kind of like the starting point of like the story, the actual arc, where it leaves the little breadcrumbs until we actually get full swing into it.
Yeah.
And we are introduced to a couple key figures that we will see throughout the story. We are introduced to Zed, who is kind of like a main love interest to Constantine for this arc.
Yeah.
And she also plays another important role. We are introduced to Constantine's family, specifically
his sister
Cheryl, and his niece Gemma.
Yeah.
And their her father, Cheryl's husband, Gemma's father. I believe his name is Tony.
Yes.
He is pathetic, and all my homies hate Tony.
Yeah.
Let me just say.
And then we also get introduced into to a cult.
Yes.
Called the Resurrection Crusade.
Mm-hmm. And let me just say, they have like little subdivisions of this cult.
Yeah.
It was very hard for me to keep track of the names.
Yeah, so they have like the Flaming Tongues and like different subsects. Then they each have different rules.
Yeah.
To give an overview, the Resurrection Crusade is a Christian cult.
Yeah, think of like Heaven's Gate.
Yes.
That type of deal.
And what they do is they essentially say you have to spend this amount of money on subscribing to our church and stuff.
Very much a commentary on like religion.
Yeah, and also you have to essentially go door to door and send out these newsletters and things to try and bring other people into the church. And the more money you bring in and the more people you bring into the church, the higher your faith level, quote unquote, gets into the church, because their whole thing is a pyramid.
Yeah, the pyramid of prayer.
Yeah.
And you send in your prayers with the subscription service.
Yeah, and the more money you bring in and things like that, the higher your prayer gets to the top of the pyramid. This also gets talked about in the next issue as well. But when your prayer reaches the top of the pyramid, they have like a news broadcast on TV that the like head evangelicals or whatever talk about, like the prayer that is at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Supposedly when they do that, God listens.
It actually happens. We get more into it in the 5th issue, the next issue, which incidentally has to be the issue that we kind of cover the least.
Yeah, because it's very
inappropriate
and rough.
Yeah.
It does serve a purpose, but it is probably the toughest read out of all these issues.
No, and when we say that it's rough, that doesn't mean it was badly written. It is a well-written issue.
Yes.
But it is
a sign of the times.
It's a sign of the times, and it's hard for me to read.
Yes. I had a hard time reading it too. I understood that it had a purpose and everything. And so we'll get into it when we get to the issue. I don't want to jump ahead too far, but I will also say this issue is also slightly rough because it does deal with the concepts of child abduction, child abuse,
not just physical abuse, but without saying the word, assault.
Yes. And also with the murder of children
Right.
as well.
So yeah, very, very rough. So if this one is rough for you as well,
the next issue will also be rough.
Yeah. Yeah. So real quick, and before we get into this issue, I'm sure it's already apparent, but I did notice that each like issue / arc kind of deals with like a very sensitive topic, where the first 2 issues dealt with addiction.
Yeah.
And then issue 3 deals with, we kind of glossed over it, but it somewhat deals with like poverty and like elitism.
Yep.
And then obviously you just mentioned what this issue deals with. And then the next issue, we'll get into it. I'll kind of say like what the theme is of the issue.
Yeah.
And it'll be made very apparent, obviously. So getting back into the actual story, we are introduced to Gemma, and we get this really, really exposition heavy like narration. You can tell that it's kind of told from the perspective of a child.
Yeah.
About how Gemma really hates living in Liverpool. Her family recently relocated there because her father has gotten them into this resurrection crusade cult, and Gemma hates it. She wishes that she could be with her friends and, you know, be happy. She misses her old home, even though it was old and wasn't the biggest or best home. Like everything about it.
Yeah, but she was happy.
Yeah, everything about it she loved. We get introduced to her, and then we kind of counterbalance her like loneliness and somberness with John, who is at the bar with some friends. He's playing pool. He wins a game of pool. He wins a bunch of money.
He's very lucky now.
Yeah, this is, they really emphasize his luck. And he ends up, his friend from the first issue is with him, and he's talking about like all his luck streak and all the stuff he's done. And his friend's like, "Oh, you want to buy me a drink?" And as John's putting a quarter into like a slot machine, and he like starts the slot machine, he's like, "Oh, get it yourself." And then a bunch of money comes out.
Jackpot or
whatever. He like does it for his friend. And then, you know, he's talking about like, "Oh, I should probably go, like I'm hungry, I should probably go out to dinner, but you know, I need a dinner date." And that's when we are instantly met with Zed, who is, like I said, a pretty major character in this first, 10 issues, and kind of the main love interest for Constantine. We cut back to Gemma, and she's about to go home. It's starting to get late, and that is when she's met with these 3 older girls who talk about how there's like this place sucks, it's boring, like there's nothing fun to do here, but our husband, he lets us do whatever we want. And Gemma's like, you guys are like teenagers, like you're not old enough to get married. And this is kind of where like the uncomfortableness kind of comes in.
They like essentially start in a way indoctrinating Gemma and taking advantage of her unhappiness with her situation and being like, "Oh no, it's not that bad. It's actually like a great time. He's never really home. So we get this house to ourselves and get to do whatever we want." And Gemma even makes a quip, you can say, and be like, well, will he marry me too? Because I hate this. Like, being a somewhat naive child about it.
Yeah.
And so
this issue definitely focuses on like the loss of innocence.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is kind of rough to read in some
ways, for sure. I will say it definitely could have taken a worse route.
Yeah.
With its depiction of all this and what's happening. Luckily, we are spared that.
Yeah, they don't fully commit to it.
Yes, which thank goodness, because it would have been too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Like it's already,
especially for a DC story.
Yes,
like because keep in mind this is still in the DC universe, and that's not saying bad shit doesn't happen in the DC universe. Bad stuff happens all the time. But there's kind of a hey, it's a little distasteful, that kind of deal.
Yeah, but it don't get me wrong. This is still rough, but it could have been way worse.
Yeah, I feel like if it had gone that far, it would have detracted from the story.
Yes, 100%.
So, we're really just intercutting Gemma and what she's doing with what Constantine's doing, because he ends up taking Zed out to dinner, and they're having a good time. They're kind of learning about each other.
And Zed's a no-nonsense woman.
Yeah.
She gets straight to it and is like, so, like, are we going to hook up or what?
Yeah. Now, I will say this. I was slightly confused on this. I think it makes a little bit more sense towards the end. I think Zed is American, because they explain that the Resurrection Crusade is like from America and has made its way to the UK.
It's kind of one of those things where it's spreading around the globe.
Yeah. So they're going back to Zed's place, and then the girls take Gemma to this big, like almost like abandoned house, and they start talking about her getting married and stuff like that, and they take her to bed because she's like, oh, I'm sleepy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you'll wear this this wedding gown, and then he'll give you a ring, and they show her their like necks, and it's like bruised and like
marked.
And one of the girls is like, it hurts at first, but afterwards it's not so bad.
Yeah. It actually starts feeling good.
Yeah, it's
essentially
very dark, and it's very foreshadowing to what gets revealed at the end of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw this, I kind of got the inkling of where they were going with this.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's an interesting thing, but it's nothing new that it's not new. I've seen stuff like that before. When they get to, when Constantine and Zed get to her place, they're starting to like, just hang out.
Start to get to the reason they're both there.
Yeah. And she turns on the radio, and there's a news broadcast about a missing girl and who never came home, named Gemma Masters. And John's instantly like, fuck, that's my niece.
He's like, my luck ran out.
Yeah. He's like, you got a car? And she's like, no. And he's like, well, do you know someone? She's like, I guess. And he's like, okay, you're driving.
Yeah.
Because a big thing is Constantine doesn't know how to drive.
Yeah.
Which I find to be so funny that he does not know how to drive.
Yeah, he knows all this magical shit and everything like that, but he doesn't even know how to drive. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Then we cut to the Master's house, and Cheryl is absolutely distraught and heartbroken that her daughter is missing. And the head like preacher of this cult is like, hey, there are thousands of like people who are in the pyramid of prayer right now. Like, you're disturbing this.
Yeah.
Like this, what's it called? Sermon. And, she's like, are you fucking serious? Like, my daughter is gone.
And the worst of it is that this cult essentially puts the blame on Gemma. Like, she is a bad soul. That is why this is happening to her.
Yeah. The preacher basically says like her soul is sinful, and this is like retribution.
Yeah.
And Cheryl fucking slaps him.
Yeah.
And the preacher's like, this woman is distraught and she's ruining our service.
Yeah.
And like
looks at her husband and it's like, you need to control your woman, essentially.
And Tony goes, maybe he's right.
Yeah. Fuck Tony.
Yeah. Fuck
Tony, dude.
And guess what? Constantine's right on that page as well. He's like, man, fuck you. You need to protect your family. So Cheryl's upset, and she's like, I don't want you near me. And she goes to her room.
Yeah. And then we get the car ride to Liverpool with Zed and John. And this is kind of where some exposition happens of like about the church and everything like that. And like some insight on John's family, like his sister leaving, and he's always hated Tony.
Yeah.
But Gemma's like a good kid,
yeah,
everything like that. And then we cut to Gemma waking up, which, funny enough, I didn't notice this at first until right now when it shows Gemma waking up in the bed and you see the other girls in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
It is very obvious that they are no longer alive.
Yeah. This is kind of where you get the reveal that like the three girls that are with her are actually spirits.
Yeah. It's that's me kind of jumping the gun on the spoil of the twist, but I bring it up because I want to mention that they try and use like the shadows of like early morning and the darkness of the room to like hide that fact. But to me, obviously after the twist, reading it for the first time, it almost feels like it's not the shadows. It's literally like you can see their bodies, which have probably been there for...
They even mention that they've been there for too long.
Yeah, for quite some time.
Yeah. We do get some nice narration of like Gemma feels awful, like emotionally, because she feels like she hurt her parents' feelings and she misses them.
Yeah.
But like she also doesn't want to go back. Like this is something that she almost has to kind of do. And then the girls get her all dressed up in her, bride outfit, and in between, that, John shows up and is essentially like, "Hey sis, I'm here." And Cheryl's like, "Holy shit, John, what the fuck are you doing here?"
Yeah.
And he's like, I heard about Gemma, like I'm gonna get her back, like I'm gonna do everything I can to save her. And both Tony and the preacher are like,
"Get the fuck out," basically.
Yeah, get out of here, you conjurer. Like,
yeah.
And the preacher even says, like, "I will not help you guys get her back if he taints her soul with his black magic."
Which is funny because you literally just told the parents that she's already a sinful soul and deserves what is happening.
Exactly, yeah. Just shows the hypocrisy. Yeah. And you can definitely tell this is a heavy criticism on religion.
Oh, yeah. I think John Constantine in general as a character usually is used as a heavy criticism for religion in general.
Yeah. So they go up to, or John tells him to fuck off.
Yeah.
And tells Tony, like, "You're a horrible father and a horrible husband." And then he has Cheryl take them to Gemma's bedroom, and he ends up grabbing this toy it was like a wooden crocodile, something that he gifted to her off of one of his like adventures.
And he's going to do divining magic to try and locate her.
So he does that, and he kind of gets the area. It's more like he draws a house. It's kind of odd because it shows him where it is, and then Zed draws the house for him.
Yeah, so like she's doing her own magic, essentially.
Yeah, they're both doing divine.
It's a sketch of the house.
Yeah,
kind of like how John got the sketch from Gaz about the African child that he had found. But and he's even like, "What are you trying to upstage me?"
Yeah,
because he only got the general location, then she got the house and
her. But both of those pieces of information are enough to really like get them where they need to go. We cut back to Gemma, who is waiting. It is very haunting. This whole page itself is kind of haunting. She's waiting in this big chair in this bridal outfit that looks scary.
And the other girls, essentially, they look like handmaids would back in the day, and are like posted up around her, like, and at first, and like Gemma's having hesitations, but the girls keep, like soothing her, being like, "Trust me, it's okay, everything will be great," and stuff like that. I honestly thought the guy that was going to show up was going to be a demon. I didn't think it was going to be like a normal person. I genuinely thought it was going to be a straight up demon.
Yeah, I did too. So the guy shows up, he walks in, and he is this towering individual. And he asks for her name, Gemma, and he takes her down into the cellar. And this is where I started to get like really uncomfortable. Because I thought, kind of like what you mentioned, I thought they were going to start taking it to that next level. And I was like, oh my God. John and Zed are in the general area of where Constantine found found his niece, and they end up paying this child like €5 or £5, and is like, "Hey, if you take me to this house, I'll pay you." And she takes him, and she's like, "I'm fucking out of here. This place is weird." They start to head in, and then we see that this man is performing this ritual to Satan. And he grabs this rope, and he begins to choke Emma. to death.
Yeah, he wraps it around her neck, and that's what it's revealed that those markings were on the other girl's neck.
Yeah,
is that his quote unquote consummation of the marriage between them is by taking their lives.
Yeah, very fucked up stuff.
It is very fucked up.
At the same time as all this, John and Zed get into the house, and that's when they discover the bed with the 3 girls in it, and they're all dead. And Zed is like in shock.
Yeah.
And John is like, there's a cellar, I have to get down there. And as Gemma is starting to like black out and lose consciousness, John shows up. Yeah, John shows up and is like, you fucking let her go. And he rushes towards the guy, but this dude's like a shit brick house. Like, he is massive.
He throws this like ritual plate that the rope was on, and it beams John right in the fucking head.
Yeah, and he starts to beat the shit out of John, and then thankfully Zed shows up and smashes a bottle over his face, and
it doesn't smash on the first hit.
No, it doesn't.
Because John makes note that she goes to fucking town on him.
Yeah.
because Zed is pissed off.
Yeah.
And it's kind of revealed later with her situation why this situation with Gemma makes her so mad.
Yeah. Yeah. So she beats the ever-living shit out of this guy, and John is like, he picks up Gemma and he's like, thank God she's not dead.
Yeah.
He's like, she's breathing, but, you know, obviously we need to take care of her. And as they're leaving, Zed is like, hey, look at this guy. And during the fight, Zed kind of ripped this guy's shirt off, and you see this brand on him. It's a title that says Damnation Army, which is kind of a play on Salvation Army, which obviously is a religious, you know, group. That has some like controversy in its past, that kind of stuff. But John's kind of like, let's get like, cool. Like, I don't give a shit. Let's get out of here.
And when they get outside, they're greeted by Gemma's mom and father, but also a like
God's warriors. That's what they're called.
Yeah. They're a lynch mob.
Yeah.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
They aren't soldiers or anything like that. They are a lynch mob.
They're kind of like the private military of the Resurrection Crusade. Sorry, I wanted to call them Righteous Crusaders, but that's Warhammer.
Yeah, that's Warhammer.
But John, they essentially say like, you know, oh, what did you do to her, you conjurer? And Tony's pissed at John as well, and John's like, maybe you should take some time to make sure your daughter's fucking okay before you lecture me. And you know what? I don't give a fuck what you guys do. Take it from here. Just leave me out of it. And they like burn the house down.
Yeah.
With the girls inside.
Yeah.
Like the bodies of the girls.
Yep.
And John's like, I don't want to be on the news. I'm leaving.
Yeah. He's like, who am I to stand between a lynch mob and their target?
Yeah.
Because I value my own life.
Right. So we cut back to this like hotel. I think it's a hotel or a motel, and John's in the bathroom. Yeah, it's a motel.
Yeah.
John's in the bath, kind of relaxing, and Zed is there, and you know, obviously they're there to do their thing that adults do, and you know, he's like, oh, do you want to join me for a bath? And she's like, yeah, give me a moment. And John kind of has this narration of like, she's a really nice girl. She's hiding something from me.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
But I know she's lying.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's kind of the end of that issue right there. And then we get to issue 5.
Yeah.
I am going to very, as quick as I can, paraphrase issue 5.
I actually just wrote a summary of issue 5. It's I'm going to read this off.
Okay. Yeah, okay. You go.
All right, I'll read this off. Well, this will be both of our paraphrasing for it. So this is what I wrote. I wrote a single paragraph. This is what I got from issue 5. Mm-hmm. John ends up stranded in the middle of a nowhere town in Iowa called Liberty. The townsfolk have taken in by the Resurrection Crusade, a scam cult. They have promised the town to bring back the young men that died in Vietnam 20 years later. There's a single survivor of the boys that went to war who came back and is struggling with PTSD. Due to the faith and the craziness of the town, on the day the Resurrection Church airs the top of the pyramid prayer, which is for liberty, causing a somewhat temporal shift, which brings back the spirits or ghosts of the dead Vietnam veterans from this town, and the quote-unquote war hero who survived, leading them through his PTSD. In the end, everyone in the town dies, and John is the only witness before he eventually leaves, admitting that he might now need to do something about the Resurrection Crusade. There are some horrific things that happen within this issue that I did not mention in this because they are, well, horrific.
Yeah. We will kind of leave it at that. I think that's actually the perfect synopsis of that issue.
Yes.
It is a very well written issue.
Yes.
I think Jamie Delano can write very well when it comes to serious topics.
Mm-hmm.
It is just not something I am comfortable with saying out loud to people, especially as, someone who is not only mixed, but also has people of different ethnicities in his family. Obviously, my nephew is mixed. My wife, her aunt is Japanese, and her cousin is half Japanese. And I just don't feel comfortable saying the really fucked up stuff that is said in this issue. Again, it's one of those cases where it's it's an art form, and it's kind of like To Kill a Mockingbird or any of those other ones that are set in the deep South type stories, where it's you have to understand that, as far as we know, the author isn't a racist.
Yeah. But it's tackling that topic. It's
tackling that topic, and it's not something I want to get into.
Yeah. I would say I feel the writer and whatnot wanted to really tackle the horrible things that happen in war, and especially the Vietnam War.
Right.
And obviously also going on that fact that the critique of religion and stuff, with the cult essentially taking advantage of people's suffering and loss and taking advantage of it. I feel that is a major theme in this. I will say I don't think it necessarily handles PTSD, that topic of discussion, very well.
It doesn't, because it very much villainizes
those who suffer.
Yeah.
100%.
And again, I come from a family that is also a military family. I personally have not served in the military, so I cannot speak from that experience, but I have multiple family members who have served in the military, not just in my family, but in Nicole's family. All of them are absolutely upstanding people who love life and love everyone, no matter what walk of life they've come from, but they still deal with their own demons, especially my great-grandfather, who served in World War II. When he was alive, he dealt with a lot of struggle with that. And the only person he ever talked about that with was my mother. And then on Nicole's side, her grandfather actually served in Vietnam. And when he was alive, very loving man. He loved life. He loved people. But he obviously dealt with his own issues. And
I also agree, because I had a great uncle who served in World War II. He's been dead for many years now. He passed from a ripe old age of 90 something. He served in World War II. He was actually on Omaha Beach when that went down. And then I had an uncle that served in the Korean War, and then I've had some like cousins and stuff like that who have actually gone into the military, served in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm not a fan of how they did the PTSD in this. I'm not a fan. I am sure because this is the 80s.
That's exactly what I was going to mention.
And the Vietnam War is recent history.
It's extremely recent,
to the 80s.
And a lot of people were against it.
Yeah, it was very much a public war. And again, with like the art, there is some very stereotypical
right out the gate
depictions of Vietnamese people. And then some of, obviously, with this veteran, he uses descriptors and words that are not okay. They are very much racist slurs and things like that. It is a rough read.
It is.
I do not necessarily think this issue is essential, other than showing how bad the cult is in this.
I agree with that statement completely, where I feel as though you could take this issue out and you would not miss anything.
Yeah. I kind of streamlined myself through this issue.
Yeah.
I made sure to I glanced through it and I picked up on the keynotes that I needed, and then I kept trucking.
Yeah.
It is, again, like you said, it's not badly written. It just, I think, is a sign of the times that it was written in and drawn in, and it's definitely for, I would say, not necessarily for a modern audience. But I still will say it does feel in line with John Constantine and the world that he is in, and how ugly it is and how awful it is. But it is not, I would agree, it is not, it's not an essential issue.
Yeah.
You could skip this and not miss a beat.
Yeah. Besides this is kind of going to be like our last statements on this issue, before we move on. Aside from the racism that's in it, it deals with SA as well. And there is a scene that is very descriptive
and very disturbing.
Very disturbing. And that kind of leans more into the idea that I have that this really isn't necessary to have. And that is kind of all I'll say about that issue. Read it at your own discretion. This is going to be the first, I think, story we've ever covered where I'm going to officially say this is not for kids. I know our show is not for kids. This book is not for kids.
Yeah.
I would not recommend you give this to little Timmy, who is 10 years old, and just expect him to be cool with it.
Yeah.
That is kind of all I'll say about it.
I would also add, this is not an issue I would recommend to really anybody. And that is the first time I feel we've ever had that stance.
Yeah.
I would not recommend this.
Yeah.
I recommend the story, just not this issue. Like I said, skip it. You're not missing a fucking thing.
Yeah. I will always say, obviously, you can skip it. You're not going to miss anything. Like you just said, you're not going to miss anything. But I can't control what people do.
Yeah.
If you're going to read it at your own risk. That is all I'm going to say about it from this point forward. And
let's move on.
Yeah, move on back to Comics to Friends, the happy,
the
happy show.
Yeah.
So we end issue 5, and we pick up with John leaving the bar that he frequents, and there are these
football hooligans.
Football hooligans?
Yeah, that's what they are.
Is that what
they're like neo-Nazi football hooligans?
Oh, I didn't know that was a term.
Well, it's not a term, but they're football hooligans are those rowdy football fans that like to get in fights. They're kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Okay,
and
yeah.
They just also happen to be neo-Nazis.
Yes. Okay. All right, that makes sense now.
Yeah.
You said that and I was like, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
So yes, he sees them, and he's obviously talking some mad shit about them. He sees that they're going to, possibly mug someone, and they start talking about, or Constantine starts talking about, some serious stuff.
Yeah.
This episode is just all about serious topics.
It's pretty serious.
He talks about how Nazis hate gay people. Mm-hmm. And that is what these individuals are going to do. They're going to go assault someone that they believe is gay.
Yep.
They go and they corner this person in a public bathroom, and the person turns around and it is a demon.
Yep.
And he fucking murders all of them. Brutally. Nothing lost.
I am not heartbroken.
Yeah, nothing lost. John decides, like, well, I guess I might as well go, like,
investigate.
Yeah. And he gets there, and the place is just
all covered in
blood. And on the ceiling, it says Damnation Army.
Yep.
Pulling that back from issue 4.
I find this part hilarious because he sees this hatch where he determines the
demon went down with the bodies.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm not following that.
No. he's like,
I'm not going down.
He's like, I'm not going down there, especially in my jacket.
Yeah.
He's like, this is a nice jacket. I'm not getting covered in shit.
I'm like, that is probably the most like normal response for someone in a situation like that. It's like, yeah, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Yeah, I'm not doing this.
I'm not doing this shit.
Yeah. So the demon takes the bodies of these assholes down into the sewer, and you see that there are other people here, like normal people down here. And this is kind of where you get the like reveal of the Damnation Army, group. And John ends up going back to the bar. He tries to call, I forget who he's trying to call. It's like some
it's
police.
It's like some asset, essentially.
Yeah.
A crime report.
That's it. Crime reporter.
And trying to get some information.
Yeah, that's it. Really, he can't get a whole lot of leads, so he's like, okay, well, I'm going to go to Zed and, do my thing.
That's when we come across and get that start of which is Zed is somehow knowing of the Resurrection Crusade.
Right. There are actually members of God's Warriors there, which is the little militia of the Crusade. And she's essentially telling them to fuck off. And if you keep fucking with me, I'm gonna fucking hurt you.
And they keep calling her Mary.
Yeah, they keep calling her Mary. And then when John shows up, he's like, you got the wrong place, dude. Get the fuck out of here. Her name's not Mary.
Yeah, and he's pretending to have a gun.
Pretending to have a gun. And they leave, and he's like, just some fingers. No gun.
Yeah.
And we cut back to the underground sewer cave system, because it's like a cave.
Yeah, this demon is named Nurgle.
Yeah. Who was actually mentioned earlier in the story in a passing glance.
Yeah, and he takes the bodies of those neo-Nazis and it ends up making an abomination out of it. And his plan is to send it after
Zed.
Zed, but we think John at first.
Yeah.
And then after he does it, because he's got a bunch of human followers there, men and women, and he sends it off, and he's like, my job here is done. Pleasure me.
Yeah.
And they just start having a fucking orgy in the sewer, and
it's crazy.
It is crazy.
At the same time,
John and
Zed are going at it, just, and they start talking about like sex is magic and all that stuff.
Yeah, one thing they say is like there's like they sit together, they synthesize a brief universe of peace, and like it's to give like that all. I don't think this sex scene is like necessarily unnecessary. I think it's to show that despite their chaotic world that both of them revolve in, they find peace within each other, even if it's only for a brief moment.
Yeah.
To try and really sell that bond between them.
Yeah. Obviously, John still has his reservations. Yeah, reservation.
Yeah. That's right.
That's the right word.
English, yes.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
He has his curiosities about it.
His cautions.
His cautions. Yeah. I'm an idiot. Don't listen. I don't know why I'm reading. And he's kind of there for like a double meaning, or for like another reason, and that's to learn more about her.
Yeah.
Because he still has suspicions. And he ends up finding this journal, one of her journals, and he's like, oh, fuck yeah. No, this is what I was looking for. And at that same time, this abomination looks like it's straight out of Warhammer.
And he's like, I have this feeling like in my pit of my stomach, something is coming, something is happening. So he gets dressed, and he's like, the best defense is to attack. And so he leaves Zed's apartment to go confront this being or whatever entity he feels coming, because he thinks it's after him. And then he realizes it too late that it's actually after Zed.
Yeah.
And so he comes rushing back up the stairs to find Zed being attacked by this abomination, because I don't think it's there to kill her. It's there to capture her.
It's there to capture her, yeah.
And when John comes in, he just kind of like, I wouldn't say snap, but he finds like
it's ridiculous.
He finds a weird humor about this abomination, because when the issue first starts, John kind of knows these neo-Nazis, not because he's friends with them,
but they hang around in the area.
Yeah, they're like the town bullies and like, losers, whatever. And he knows that because there's 4 of them. He knows that 2 of them are an Arsenal fan, and then 2 of them are a Chelsea fan as far as football goes. Soccer for the Americans in the room. And they have like tattoos of their favorite teams on them. And this abomination, it has 4 heads, it has all their legs, and it has all of their arms. It just shares like a torso.
Yeah.
And he finds it so funny that there are 2 fans of Arsenal and 2 fans of Chelsea all attached to one body. And finds it funny enough that in the midst of his lover being taken by an abomination to just start laughing about it. And his laughing stuns the abomination, and then he starts bringing it up, like, and he uses like, who's better, like, Arsenal or Chelsea, and the abomination starts killing it.
They start arguing, and they just tear each other apart, and John's like, let's get out of here. He's like, my job is done.
Like,
I was like, what the fuck?
Dude, it was so like off the wall, but also at the same time, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of Constantine.
Yeah.
Like, he's always thinking of avant-garde ways to like beat his enemies.
Yeah.
He's a tricky dude.
Yeah, I like that about him.
Yeah.
He doesn't win in conventional like means.
Yeah.
It's always by the skin of his teeth and by some crazy plan.
Yeah, and subterfuge and stuff like that. Like, I mean, like, he beat a demon lord because he bluffed.
Yeah.
Like, that could have gone so bad.
That's a feat that not a whole lot of heroes in the DC universe can say they have. Or Marvel. Yeah.
Looking at you, Spider-Man.
Yeah, for real. So yeah, John's friend from the beginning of the story shows up. Not Gaz, because Gaz is fucking dead.
Yeah.
But the other one is like, hey, where do we need to go, John? Because they're still running. And John's like, fucking finally you showed up. And he's like, we need to go to Camden.
Yeah.
And that's because that's where Ray lives. And Zed is like, where are we going? And he's like, we're going to my sanctuary. And he's like, hey, Ray, like, open up. I need you to come in. And he lets him in. And, she's like taking a shower, and John and Ray are hanging out. And John's like, so I noticed that the shop's boarded up. What's going on, man? And Ray is obviously gay. And this story happens to also take place during the AIDS, situation.
Yeah.
The what was it called?
I'd say AIDS pandemic was the term used at the time.
Right.
But I think a lot of people get that time confused with only like with the gay community and stuff like that. It wasn't like people weren't getting AIDS just because of that.
Yeah.
A lot of it had to do with drugs.
Yes.
Because the 80s was a huge boom in drug users and stuff like that. So like how you contract AIDS is usually through blood and
use needles,
people sharing needles and things like that.
Yep.
But it was revealed earlier when John had gone to Ray. Ray admitted, he's like, because, John's checking on his friend. Ray admitted that he had AIDS.
Yeah.
Now, it seems rumor had gotten out about Ray being gay and having AIDS, and now people have been harassing him, breaking his windows and stuff like that.
Very, very fucked up situation, and it's obviously very indicative of the times, and the ignorance that people had to the whole situation, the lack of science that was there, the lack of
or care,
or of lack of care that was really a big part
sympathy.
Of it. And obviously politicians used it for their own gain.
Constantine's very sympathetic. Ray. He's like, I'm so sorry.
So we get that reveal that Ray is going through a hard time, and John's like, look, I understand you're going through a hard time, but I need you to watch her. Like, I have work that I have to do. And while John's kind of like by himself, thinking to himself, the phone rings, and that is when Nurgle kind of reveals himself.
Yeah.
And he doesn't say his name, but he tells John, like, you know who I am.
Yeah.
And we kind of get this call back to this town called Winchester, or not Winchester, Newcastle.
Yeah.
And they keep on hinting at it. They keep on foreshadowing.
It's one of the big things also hinted at the end of the 10th issue.
Correct, which is the end.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where issue 6 ends. Issue 7 opens up with John going to one of his magician friends, who I believe his name is Richie. Yes, Richie, who is an electronic magician. He like uses technology
and magic.
He's
a hacker, essentially.
Yeah, he's a hacker.
He's a magical hacker.
Yeah,
which is really, really strange, actually.
And it's weird looking, but I kind of appreciate it.
Very trippy as well.
Yeah, I kind of appreciate the techniques that they use in this issue, especially when he like plugs into the Matrix. Like, that's the best way I can explain it. Because John is like us, where he's like, this sounds ridiculous. He's like, you're not going to digitize yourself and go into the internet. That's weird.
Yeah.
Because I think at this point, the internet, I forget when the internet was created, but it was created in the 80s.
Yeah, it's like early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah, so...
Because technically, this run, the first issue came out in 88.
Yes.
So we're about that time.
Yeah. So internet's a big new thing. Obviously, that there's a commentary on that where it's like technology is advancing really fast, and the internet, is a fucking treasure trove of information, and the benefits and also the risks that come with that. Obviously, reading this 40 years into the future, we can kind of say like, damn, kind of wild how like they was kind of right.
It's crazy because, I think it's commented, like I've heard people talk about the world just changed so fast and drastically pre and then post internet.
Yeah.
Like America was not anywhere the same as it is now as it was before the internet. And like a lot of things in life, the internet has its pros and cons. It allows for information to be shared. It allows people to connect that would never know each other otherwise, allow communities to form. But there's good and bad in that, you know?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think the internet is one of those things where it's like, it was such a wild west for a long time that now the genie is kind of out of the bottle, and we're not going to be able to put it back in.
No. So to kind of summarize this issue, Richie goes into the internet using his magic because he needs him to find out about this kind of sub division of the church, or
the Resurrection Crusade.
Yeah, called I believe they were called the Flaming Tongues.
Yeah, the Flaming Tongues.
Yep. And he needs to figure out what their deal is and how they're involved in all of this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Ray is trying to make sure Zed feels at home. And that is when the God's warriors show up at Ray's house. And they, like, hey, Mary, it's time for us to go. And Ray's like, look, I think you have the wrong girl. This isn't Mary. Like, if you guys could just leave.
Yeah.
And they start berating Ray
for being gay.
Yeah.
And they end up taking Zed and beating him to death.
Yeah. It is a very sad situation that has a pretty big effect on Constantine.
Yes, very much so.
And at the same time, while Constantine is trying to wait for Richie to return, Richie's learning all this new stuff. He passes on a lot of this information to him. And at the same time, it's kind of funny and fucked up at the same time.
His body just combusts.
Yeah, it like bursts into flames and burns to like, ash.
Yeah.
But Richie's like, oh man, this is awesome. Yeah. Like, because Richie kind of like
uses his soul to go into.
Yeah, he uses his soul to go into the internet. And he talks to Constantine through the computer. And he kind of explains to Constantine that doing this is kind of like tripping on acid.
Yeah.
Like it feels good.
Yeah.
And it's just.
And he found out that like the crusade is using like some kind of primordial source and stuff. And, at first he was like scared of it, but then he got through and everything. And he's like, make me a cup of coffee, mate. I get real parched when I do this. And Constantine's like, yeah, man, as he's looking at his charred body. And and this goes to show that John is not a perfect person.
Yeah.
Instead of like telling him the truth and like maybe trying to help or anything, all he does is unplug the computer.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I can't deal with the screaming or the fear or anything like that. So he just, he Control-Alt-Delete.
Yeah. And he tells, or he kind of talks to himself, and he's like, everything I touch, like, turns to ash. Kind of that kind of deal where it's like everything turns to shit.
Yeah. He tries to do the right thing, and it doesn't matter because everything he touches just ends up blowing up in his face.
And he thinks about all the people that he's come into contact, and it really fucks him up. And then the ghosts of his past show up, and he's like, oh, fucking great. Now you guys are here to tell me how much of a piece of shit I am. And, the ghosts are sitting there telling him, like, we all have to pay our dues.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the way of life. And even Gaz is like, we have personal responsibilities that we have to take care of.
And then he ends up having such a panic reaction to the ghost berating him, he jumps out of a moving train.
Yeah, and it fucks him up.
Yeah.
he like breaks a bunch of bones.
The next issue is there's some stuff that happens in it, but honestly, we could summarize everything you learned.
Yeah.
And like, at first John's tortured by nightmares in this hospital. Then Zed is being prepped this entire time for a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And then John is visited by Nurgle while in the hospital. And Nurgle obviously leads the Damnation Army. He then explains that there's this balance that's been achieved by hell and heaven and on earth, but it got disrupted by human interlopers.
Mm-hmm.
And it threw hell in a tizzy, essentially. And heaven took advantage of that. And now there is a prophecy of a birth of a child that will bring healing to the world, and it will not be in hell's favor.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially being like, there is a second coming of Christ, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And it is revealed that Zed is supposed to be, obviously this is why they kept calling her Mary.
Mm-hmm.
She is supposed to be the Virgin Mary come again and give birth to a child from heaven who is supposed to then deliver them.
Yeah.
John,
now they do reveal that she doesn't have to be a virgin.
Yes.
When they begin to
it's
prep
a
her.
mental state is what they say.
Yeah.
And John's like in a full body cast. The demon ends up injecting his own blood into John. It painfully heals John back to full health and with a little extra pep in his step.
Mm-hmm.
And now John is on his way to Glastonbury, which is where Zed is being located at.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he's supposed to be heading anyway.
Yeah. I will say this is kind of issue 9 is kind of where we see John at his lowest.
Yes.
For this arc, where he just feels like broken.
Yeah, he's in a vast spiral of depression and anger. And because John uses anger a lot to cope with things, it's like his reactionary response to a lot of stuff that happens to him. And they do this really cool thing where he keeps getting haunted by his ghost, but getting chased by this unknown figure that takes forms of different things, like laundry. He runs into a bank to run from it, and then it turns into cash, and then it's newspapers and things like that. It keeps chasing him. And then it finally catches up to him, and I'm pretty sure, I don't think it's Ray, I'm pretty sure it's himself that he's talking to.
Yeah, kind of. At least that's the impression I get. It's either himself or someone else from his past that's just not named that we learned.
Because it looks later. A lot like him.
It does. It almost, when I was reading it, I was almost like, is this like his dad?
To me, it just looked like a cleaned up version of himself.
Like what he's supposed to be.
Yeah, like the ideal of himself. Like the part of him that died when he became jaded and whatnot through the world. And he has this conversation with himself and is basically like, you know, you're going out, like, in a way, he's like, you're going out with a whimper instead of like, you know, going out with a bang, essentially.
Yeah.
And like it basically reinvigorates John to do the right thing and why he got into doing this in the first place before these bad things happened to him and it caused him to be jaded and whatnot. And he ends up cleaning himself up and he goes out to Glastonbury, and Zed is like she's kind of accepted her fate of being this host for the second coming.
Kind of like a martyr.
Yeah. And John ends up finding her. Yeah. And, you know, John at first is like, I can take you away from here, whatever. And she's like, no, like, I've accepted this fate. It's fine. And John kind of understands because he says, like, it's better to be queen of heaven than martyr of hell or something like that. And so they end up sleeping with each other one last time.
Inside this, like, massive tree.
Like this hollowed out tree. And John admits that he has some kind of feelings for her and stuff. But as he's walking away, as she's sleeping, he realizes, he says, but always the treasonous friend or something like that, because what he has done, being tainted himself with the blood of the demon that healed him, he has now tainted her. Yeah. And he knows this, and he's hoping that all it does is they call off the ritual, or it doesn't happen. And then when he gets home, he is then confronted by Swamp Thing, who is using a tobacco plant to talk to John. And I find it so funny. John's like taking pieces of tobacco off him and rolling his own cigarette and everything.
And Swamp Thing's like, you're a terrible person, Constantine. Like, I want to kill you, but like, I know I can't.
But then John's like, I have a plan, don't worry. And that's pretty much issue 9. I do want to bring up, I almost feel like this situation with the demon's blood in him, I can't speak for the intent of the writer, but to me, it feels very much allegory to the AIDS virus, considering it has been something that has been brought up multiple times in a story, or even if it's not an allegory, it's definitely maybe some kind of biasy or whatnot of the context of the writers of the world that the writers in. So there's influence on that. And that is one reason why I hate when people say that, you know, art is not political, because it is always political, because humans contract biases.
Yeah. You're always going to put your subjectivity or objectivity into something. Yeah. You know, obviously the the level of which it shows
is different
for everyone.
but it's always there because people are influenced by the things around them.
Yeah.
Small rant. Anyway.
Now the final issue of this arc opens up kind of wild. I'm just going to say this before I let you take over for this issue.
Yeah.
So it starts out with like space, like the sun and everything, and then the sun explodes,
and you see with what looks like asteroids.
They look like,
and then they start looking like sperm.
And then it zooms into one of these, and inside of it
is John.
It's a baby, but with adult John's head on it. What the absolute fuck?
I forget the monologue that's happening, but it's essentially like, talking about life and death and stuff, because John, he thinks he's having like a vision right before his death. Because he thinks Swamp Thing got fed up with his bullshit and outright killed him.
Yeah.
But then he eventually remembers that, as he gets his bearing, that he's actually in his astral.
He's astral projecting.
He's astral projecting in his astral form. And so he collects himself, and he's like, well, while I'm in... The reason he's in the astral form is because Swamp Thing wants to do the deed with his lover.
Yeah.
And in doing so is throwing Nurgle's plan in disarray somehow. I'm not quite clear on that. And so while John is in his astral projection, because let's also add, the title of this issue is Sex and Death.
Yeah.
So John's in astral form, and he's like, okay, while Swamp Thing's doing his thing, and he also makes comments on how Swamp Thing's actually just a horny old man, which was kind of funny because he was so, like, too preemptive or, like, quick to, like, force John out of his body.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was just, the dialogue on that's kind of funny. While he's in astral form, John's like, I'm going to go check on Zed because I know the ritual should be happening.
Yeah.
He's hoping that the ritual just gets called off, or the being that's come to impregnate Zed with the second coming of Christ would just turn up his nose
and just fuck off.
This does not happen.
No, it's not.
The angel that comes down ends up killing Zed and everybody else attending the ritual.
Yeah.
And John's like, fuck, I really fucked up. This was not how I planned.
This is legitimately the fucking, oh no meme. It was like, oh man.
He's like, this was not how I imagined this going. I feel really guilty. Add this another ghost to the pile kind of thing, And as he's watching the ritual, he sees that a soul of one of the members of the cult actually has these like red arms attached to him. And as the souls are like going to heaven or whatever, or wherever they're supposed to go, Nurgle, the demon, actually rips one of the souls that was his spy back towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, John's like, I'm going to follow it because I'm going to follow it back to Nurgle and I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah.
He goes, realize that Nurgle's super strong, and he's actually in deep shit being in astral form, because when you're in an astral form, you're essentially just your soul.
Yeah, you don't get any of the like the extra cool shit for being in the DC universe.
Yes. And so he's running from Nurgle in the astral realm and stuff, and Nurgle's like, you can't beat me. I'm going to devour your soul. I tricked you. I won, and he ends up making it to the green in the astral plane and ends up re-inhabiting his body while still inhabiting Swamp Thing's lover's body. And she realizes that John is back in his body, slaps the shit out of him, and is like, I hate you, you're disgusting. This was your plan the whole time, wasn't it? And he's like, no, like I was gonna die. I had to reinhabit.
Yeah, like you gotta understand, I was in some deep shit.
And then Swamp Thing shows up. Swamp Thing seems to understand the situation, but I mean, no one really likes John.
No, not really.
So, like, he's still kind of a dick to John about it.
Yeah.
But he at least understands the situation that John was in.
Yeah.
And he even tells Swamp Thing, he's like, I tried to tell her, like, I'm sorry, like, you know, like, explain this.
She's pretty fucking
But
pissed.
she's pretty fucking pissed, which I can imagine.
Yeah.
You know? I understand it.
And Swamp Thing's essentially like, you should probably just go.
Yeah, you should just kind of fuck off right now.
Yeah.
But he does warn that Nurgle essentially had a message for John.
Yeah.
And is like, basically like, remember Newcastle.
Yeah.
Which again is like this huge thing. And so because of that, John is like, okay, like this is like, I need to go deal with this Newcastle thing.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It's all connected, especially in a way to hopefully beat Nurgle. So he goes back to the place he was staying in the first issue, with Mrs. M, who runs the apartment building that he's in or whatever. Comes home, finds her murdered and other tenants murdered. Goes into I believe his apartment, which I think more murdered people are in. I can't remember.
Murder.
Yeah, there's just murder everywhere. And he manages to come across a file that he had like stashed there that says Newcastle on it. And that is where the end of the issue, is at. And he's essentially now like kind of going at war with Nurgle and figuring out how the past relates to the present.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's where the 10th issue. I know we've kind of bum rushed these last issues, but there's crazy shit that happens, and it's easier to just paraphrase what's going on.
You get a lot of we kind of talked about this in our Warhammer episode, where you get a lot of word salad thrown at you because
it's just a lot of heavily descriptive narration of what's happening on the page.
Yeah. Which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
If you're reading it.
Yes.
If you're
talking about
it on a show that revolves around you telling jokes about comics, Well,
I don't know if Hellblazer is the right comic to be telling jokes.
But yeah, no, that's essentially it. That is the end of the issue, or the arc of Original Sins. And I would say overall, I thought it was pretty cool. I liked it for the most part.
Am interested in it in the sole fact that I'm interested in John's character.
Yeah.
I am interested in the world that it's built up, and the way heaven and hell and other sorcerers and conjurers and stuff interact with the real world, and the fact that it's kind of grungy, like not like I am a wizard in a hat and I cast spells like lightning out of my hand. It's like I got to do really fucked up rituals to get a result that I need, or whatever it may be. I really like it. The edgelord part of me like gets it and understands, but then like the adult mature Mason also understands. This is, if you want to get into Constantine, I guess sure, read this.
I would not say this is a good place to start.
I wouldn't say it is either. Like if you're trying to fill out your Constantine like quota of like, okay, I've read all of Constantine, like you're gonna have to read this at some point. But like it's a tough read.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like you kind of have to have a little bit of a thick skin, definitely some like maturity and media literacy and context of when this was written and stuff.
So they also make references to like things that were happening at the time.
Yes. So it's definitely like you got to be a mature and reasonable adult to read this and get something out of it, that like to get that genuine story out of it.
Yeah.
Thick skin's not the right word, I'd say. It's just like you just gotta I don't know how to explain it, but like you need to have that media literacy and
you have to have like social awareness
and stuff like that to understand the context that this was written in.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, all you're going to do is get hurt by the contents of it, especially if there are topics that it covers that you are sensitive about or that bother you. Like we said at the beginning of this episode, and especially about issue number 5, read at your own discretion.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I think that is essentially it. I mean, a lot of my feelings are kind of the same as yours.
Yeah.
There's not much I can really add to it, other than, you know, I had fun with the story. I thought it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's dark. Like you said, it's very noir.
Yeah.
And I do like that as like a breath of fresh air compared to what I normally read.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not my favorite thing in the world because I'm always going to love the more like hopeful side of DC than anything.
Yeah.
But if you want something that's a little bit more serious and you, like Mason said, if you can handle it, like give this a read. The only issue that I guess we necessarily have an actual, I say issue, very like problem with very lightly is issue 5.
Yeah.
It's not that we have a problem with it in the sense of it's shit or garbage. It's just such a sensitive like the topics in there are so sensitive and the way that they handle them varies drastically in quality.
Yeah.
And I will still stand by you're not necessarily missing anything if you don't read issue 5.
But if it's something that,
if you want the full experience,
and you feel you can stomach it, go ahead and read it. But yeah, I would say it's really not a necessary read. It doesn't really add much to the story. I mean, shit, Constantine's not even really in it a whole lot in that issue.
Yeah.
He is more of a bystander observing.
Mm-hmm.
I would be super excited to read a more modern Hellblazer story and then do like a comparison of like how the character was written then and how the character is written now. You know, I would love to do that and then like have a comparison of the two. So I definitely do want to check out more Hellblazer. I do like Constantine as a character. I did like his short stint on TV.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Matt Ryan is the one that plays him for the live action and does the voice for him in the DC animated shows.
I think so. I know Keanu Reeves was also
yes
Constantine at one point.
As much as I love Keanu Reeves, that's not an entirely accurate depiction of Constantine. They are supposedly making a second one with Keanu Reeves as like a sequel to that old.
We'll see how that.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I like Matt Ryan's version. His voice very much to me because
that's what I think of
every single time. So I like the character. I like the world. It does deal with heavy topics, so you have to be able to be mature about it and understand it. Again, I'd like to read a more modern story to get a comparison. But
I would too. I would like to see him interact with more of the universe.
And also just more modern setting as well.
Before we go, there is one thing I have to shout out for this story. It's less about the writing and more about the art. We didn't mention it at the beginning, but I just have to shout it out because I love it. The covers for this series are so fucking awesome.
Really?
They're done by Dave McKean, who is I believe a British artist who is very well known for his use of drawings, paintings, and real like actual photography to create his art. And that shines through beautifully with the covers of this book. I don't know if this is correct, but I think he also did the covers for Sandman. I could be wrong about that.
I have to see a similarity 100%.
I'd have to do some research on that. But it is so
good,
beautiful.
Yeah.
These covers, like they're works of art. Like you could turn any of them into like a print, like a canvas print or something like that, and I'd buy it. It's just so good. Like if you take anything away from that, like there's no getting around that those covers are
really good.
They're haunting.
You could hate everything else about the story, but I would doubt you so
Like-
much if you said you hated the cover.
Yeah, like that, especially like the first issue cover where it's just John.
Yeah.
Like that is, to me, it's iconic. Like
And-
that's the image I think of when I think of Constantine.
And adds to that noir feel.
It does.
100%.
And it's so cool because as you progress through the story, you see more kind of like fucked up things in it, like demonic depictions of things, or like, you know, monsters, demons, all just, it's cool. It's just awesome. Like I'm sorry we didn't really talk about it, and I kind of, before we go, I just kind of have to shout out the covers, and
They're great.
Dave McKean, so good. So yeah, that was my little gush about the covers of the story that we read. You can pick up the story in trade. You're not going to be able to get it in single issues because it is his first run. You can get most of it probably. There's 300 issues in the run, so
or just get the volume.
Or just get the volumes. There is also a big omnibus that recently released of it. You can pick those up pretty easily.
We ended up using the DC app.
Yeah, the DC Infinite. So you can definitely check it out on there if you have a subscription. I will recommend it to adult audiences who are mature enough to handle the content inside the story. But yeah, that's essentially all I have to say.
That's all I got.
All right. Then I guess that is it for us. This has been Comics with Friends, the bi-weekly podcast where two best buds get together and read some comics, normally fun comics, and occasionally some very serious comics that make us get a little bit serious at times. But if you enjoyed it, please give us a like, subscribe, share the video, maybe comment, tell us what you liked about what we did, maybe what we didn't like about what we did. Either way, we want to hear your opinion. So yeah, you have a great rest of the day, week, month, whatever you want, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Please practice magic responsibly. Bye.